having good discussions, connecting with people on like a human level is one of my skills. And so how do I turn that into a financial edge as well?
Hey, what's up, everybody? GP13 or John Schilling. Got to start using the name since I got kicked off Twitter anyway. So that that handle is probably less prominent. But here, and I just want to welcome in Joseph, a good friend of mine who I talk a lot about various topics in the space, whether it's betting, promotion strategy, psychology, you name it. I think that we've had some of my most interesting conversations around betting, and I thought, well, why don't we do one publicly? So yeah, Joseph, welcome to the show.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I think that there's definitely been a number of guests of more note than but I think we'll get into some interesting subjects. I have a different background than most bettors, so.
Well, in that vein, one of those guests of notes usually asks, "How is life growing up?" I kind of do a different version, which is, how do you stumble your way into this weird world of advantage gambling?
Yeah, I very unexpected for me. I unlike, I listen to quite a few of these podcasts from you, from others. It's a lot of interviews, and whenever you're getting the backstory, there's like some recurring themes. There's like, my uncle liked horses, or I got into poker during a time when that was booming, or like, my family was always into betting. I love sports. I kind of have none of that background. I grew up in a family that was religious, a fairly alternative religion, very little influence of sports. I did like some rec leagues when I was really young, but moved outside of that. And gambling is like specifically prohibited in the sect that I was raised in. And so
It's named.
yeah, among like only a handful of top tier like
Wow.
forbidden things. And so, childhood background, no connection to betting of any form. And then as I got a bit older, I actually went even further in the opposite direction. I became very devoutly religious myself, and I moved into a community that was all about that, and spent my early adulthood really living like a monk, like, very
The gambling
distant.
monk.
Well, no, this is all
No, yeah.
pre-gambling. So it's like, not only was I not gambling, my ideals at the time were really different from the general world, but especially from people who are betting, like anyone who's, like the bottom line is what's driving the endeavor. That was not at all where I was coming from in my life, and so it's just very different. But long story short, I came to view all that as not good. So eventually, I came to view the whole environment as like extremely manipulative. Leaving behind the ideology means so much of what you do that is ultimately to serve that end ceases to be important to you, the whole lifestyle that I led for all those years and stuff. And so on the heels of that fairly significant transition, I spent some time focusing on that subject. I got involved in kind of like cult awareness work, and I ultimately went to school and got a master's degree in social psychology, specifically looking at sort of manipulation, influence, mostly looking at ways in which, people mistreat other people and the effects that has, and how to prevent it, and how to treat people who have already been affected by it and stuff. And then I, went into nonprofits, which is a very natural field for everything that I was interested in. And I've spent quite a few years doing nonprofit work related to different forms of like abuse prevention and things like that. And I also like to say, nonprofits, not particularly lucrative. It's in the name, nonprofit, like you're not making money there. After time, that also becomes somewhat dissatisfying. But ultimately, I met a friend in the context of nonprofit work, and come late 2023, he was like, hey, sports betting is about to become legal in your state. I've been doing some like promotional hustling, I sort of been doing the system to make this money with zero risk. And if you wanted to do that, it could be some good side money for you, and I could just like guide you through it, keep a percentage, and we could go from there. And so I had a little chunk of money, and I was like, all right, yeah, let's not doing anything else with it, let's make our foray down that path. My first wager ever was a FanDuel $3,000 risk-free bet, all $3,000, but hedged on the other side. It was, using risk-free conversion methods. But, so my first betting really was a form of advantage play from jump. And at that time, I didn't know what a point spread was, truly. Like I had a friend who just told me, put your finger here, click this, click that, and we'd hop on the phone and, just doing as I was told, basically. But eventually I quit my job for unrelated reasons, and this just was still making me money. And then it sort of, evolved from there into other forms of play and into actual risk and et cetera. So I'm sure we'll dive into some of that more. But yeah, that's kind of where I came from. And as a result, I think of the various unusual backgrounds I have all combined, it makes sometimes for like some interesting, maybe outsider's perspective on some of these things, that like I didn't work my way from enjoying betting, being frustrated with losing, finding out there's like some other methods and sort of working through that. It's just like I just came straight into the advantages and learning everything through that. But all that said, betting has been my sole source of income for about a year and a half now. So it's where I am.
Well, I mean, pretty standard, honestly, background. Nothing, I mean, you made it to seem so unique, but I'm pretty sure like half the guests like come from devout religious sects and start, it's not that unique. Okay. No, so there's two things that stick out to me. One is there's two. So one is like, I don't even know which way I want to go first, because there's the psychology route, which I think puts you at a unique position where you had to kind of, what I imagine is probably the most difficult thing you've ever had to do, which is say like, hey, this stuff that I believed for so long, this group that I've kind of bought into, I actually disagree with what they're doing and I'm separating themselves. And I think in gambling, like one of the most important skills is to be able to separate yourself from the herd from a thinking standpoint, because where there's a lot of people, there's usually little opportunity. So like ultimately by nature, like gambling and advantage play comes in the spots where you're thinking differently. And it sounds like that was an incredibly difficult thing to do, but it probably made the rest of the gambling stuff that's usually hard for people in terms of thinking differently, like pretty easy for you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, in terms of the difficulty of diverging from a group, yeah, anything that I'll likely face in the remainder of my life will pale in comparison. It was a intense transition for sure, but I do think that there's some really valuable lessons that came from that. I mean, one is like never being too certain. If you hold a very comprehensive worldview with certainty, and later you come to think that was inaccurate or an error, it's sort of, for me, like I look at people who are over certain or overconfident, and it's a little bit like, well, that's quaint. like life hasn't walloped you recently, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah.
Um, and so that is like, I don't know, there's like a intellectual humility in that, I guess, that I think is really valuable. And where that translates is like remaining open to other edges, other perspectives. I've heard you make the point, like the initial instinct when looking at like especially like a direct competitor's success might be to like invalidate however they're getting, like, oh, they're on a hot streak, but they don't have anything at the core of it or whatever it may be, when really like the smartest approach is like, is there something there that I'm unaware of that I haven't tapped into? And so, I learned that, I'd say, like on a deep level personally, but then also that is what scientific reasoning is. It's not making assumptions that are beyond the data that you have. And so that ability to not jump to a conclusion and remain open, I think allows you to really consider opportunities. And of course, there's a point of diminishing returns. If you give every idea a full day of investigation, you're gonna end up like wasting some time. But I definitely think that, yeah, life experience and and some formal training definitely have some translatable skills.
I couldn't say it better. I like that you brought. I was thinking about that today about it seems like in sports betting, it's like even it was in poker I found it, but people would immediately be like, "Oh, that person, oh, they suck. They're only winning because they play in soft games," or "Oh, steam chasing moron, whatever." Like it's like calling Spanky like, "Oh, what a steam chaser! Like he sucks." It's like he's probably your landlord, like
Right.
something, right? And
Hopefully
it's
not
like you
mine,
just,
because I got
yeah,
some
yeah,
issues with
yeah.
mine. But anyway.
But yeah, it's like that intellectual I think you just cap yourself if it's natural, I think, to try and like protect your ego by saying that certain things that other people are doing, oh, that's low hanging fruit, what an idiot, whatever, you know well, if he's, why do you care? Or if they're making more money than you, then you should care, but it should be a different type of caring. But I found that was something early in poker. I would be like, oh yeah, these guys suck on Doyle Brunson, he sucks. It's like, yeah, he probably just made like $2 million last year, and you're in a dorm room like making like 30K. It's
Right,
like
right.
he doesn't suck. Grow up, grow up. But like it's so natural to do that shit. So I do think that's something that over time, like I've kind of that it's been helpful not to think in that way, even though I found it kind of natural early on to kind of try and put
Well, I
down
think
like
I think
others
that
around me.
I think that all the bad habits of gambling are the more natural ones. That's why it's
Mm.
hard. Like
Mhm.
we're dealing with very human heuristics, like heuristics is like shortcut ways of reaching conclusions. We have to employ them all throughout our day because we're presented with similar situations and we can't treat each one like it's new. But they can also like bite us in the butt if we assume too much. One thing that I think you've done well is people can lose sight of the fact that there's like a whole range of motives in getting involved in this. And so, frankly, like the highest EV play, which first of all, isn't even the ideal play, as your previous guest spells out really well in the course he made for you. Like, we're not actually purely following EV. We're talking about
Mhm.
growth. Um, but there's so many reasons why the ideal mathematical play might not be the ideal play for an individual, and it annoys me sometimes when I see people completely losing sight of that and almost like disparaging people for either not having the same goals as them, which is just like silly, or not having the same knowledge base that allows them to maybe optimally convert something. And then there's just like so many other circumstances in people's personal lives that we know nothing about and can't even begin to conjecture. And then beyond all that is like a person's personal risk tolerance, and that is completely individual. And like there's a space for encouraging your peers to like, no, you really should raise your unit size, you've been winning, like, but that's very different than like thinking you've hit the sweet spot of the ideal way to like bet. When I view betting as like a soundboard, there's like so many knobs and so many things to be tweaked, and each situation is going to warrant some slightly different tweaking of those things. And so, maybe everyone just be a little more patient, and then like, just
Ah,
it,
yes.
it helps with the culture too, if people approach it that way, I think.
Well, I mean, it's good that gambling Twitter is an empathetic place, filled with a lot of open-minded individuals. No, but seriously, like I think I even came across this on my own where I was on probably the wrong side of this, and it was that I've talked. I think maybe, or I've definitely at this point I've talked about everything. It was like someone was like, who's the best sports bettor, right? So someone was like, well, it doesn't count if you win like in these ways. I'm like, oh, that's definitely stupid. And I still agree with that. Like it's like you're only good if you win this specific way. And I was like, that's so dumb. Like obviously then the answer is whoever makes the most money, because I don't think like it really matters how you win. The goal of the game is to extract money from it, right? And that's a good way to kind of compare bettors across different disciplines or styles. So I was like, that seems to be the obvious way. And then someone else, it might have been Sharp Clark or maybe even Rufus, and they were like, well, yes, but like also, you want to get what you want out of it, get some enjoyment out of it. Like I like doing XYZ. So like even if it doesn't make the most money, I like doing it. Now that doesn't mean that someone who likes doing something else or does something else is like wrong or a bad better, but like there is that factor of, you're doing what you enjoy too. So then, like you said, betting is this soundboard. It's like you're kind of just tweaking it to make it fit into your life the best. And then who's the best? I guess whoever makes it fit their life the best or give themselves the optimal life, right? So like I
Yeah.
do think dollars are really important and underrated. So is doing something, making it fit into your life. If you're steam chasing 24/7 and you don't have time to, do some other stuff you want, then that might not mean that you're the best better for you that you can
Right,
be.
right. Yeah. And I think it's interesting. I mean, I don't have betting experience that predates the current environment really, but I think that the tools that are largely available, especially for people who aren't originating, and then the corresponding discords and stuff, it creates a unique situation. Like the place that you are getting your bets from also has implications for like how you're betting and so on. So like you might be in a discord with someone whose goal is to like make 20 grand a year in addition to their job and preserve their primary accounts as long as possible because they don't want the hassle of secondary one. Like that's totally valid to me. And so I think some of the difficulty arises from just like, okay, these people have genuinely different aims. And so sometimes what is most appropriate, they'll differ there too. And then there can, I've definitely seen some conflict. And I appreciated on some podcast hearing Spanky get a little serious and be like, this is my livelihood, so like it's not
Totally.
all fun and games for me. And as I transitioned to this being my sole source of income, I definitely saw some of that shift where like for people whom the interaction is a large chunk of the pie of what they're gaining in life from it. Like there are people who want to be profitable, want to be able to bet on sports or sweat bets, and they want to interact with other people. And I've definitely enjoyed the social aspect of it as well. But moving from this being like a supplemental hustle that I was doing to month over month, I need this to pay my bills and hopefully, and then some, it does start to shift. And so there are places where maybe the fraternizing to sound old, uh, like actually is eating into the EV. And where that starts to occur, or where the environment is discouraging people from contributing plays, that's when I'm like, all right, like this isn't actually even fun anymore because I'm only here for friends and socializing secondarily. Like that's not what we're here for. So I think it's also understandable that there be some tensions because there is such a broad swath of like aims and people. I guess everyone just do the best they can to be civil and understand the differences. And
Yeah, I agree. And I think like that question kind of divided people amongst the lines of like who does this literally to eat and to put a house over their head. That's why this is what this pays, this is the only thing I have that pays the bills. I need to win. There isn't like an option of like, hey, you had fun. You got to sweat a bet and like shit talk some professional athlete or whatever,
right,
it's
right.
not like there's no option. And when I heard your background, you came in and that was, you needed to win. And I think we both look at this as like a for-profit business enterprise. And we talk a lot about when we talk, a lot of the conversation is around like making money and, what can you do outside of just having a good model, having good info or whatever. Like where are the little tweaks that make you more money no matter what they are. And I think like that's how Spanky views it. And that's how a lot of people who do this full time view it. And it's okay. Like if you view it a different way, and you don't do this full time, like you probably should view it a different way. Like it'd be really boring, I think,
Yeah.
if you didn't do this full time to really treat it like a job. But like, if you do, then it's very serious business. And I was literally like, today we were like chatting back and forth about some BS, and I was like, the amount of alpha we piss away talking about Rory McIlroy, Scotty Scheffler, and like stupid like golf shit like that has nothing to do with winning could feed a family of 4 for years.
Right.
And it's like so true though. And I was like half joking, but I was like, this isn't what we're here to do, really. Like we're here to make money, like.
Yeah, and I totally think that there's a balance, but what it's about is being cognizant of where that time is actually falling, so that you're not like inadvertently eating more into like I have a betting friend, and we made a weekly 1 hour meeting that we do together. We don't even we partner a little bit on actual plays, but it's mostly like we both quit previous jobs and this is our lifestyle now, and we recognize that there's some constant adjustments and improvements, and so we want to kind of check in with each other and discuss those things. And like, I turn off my notifications during that time, and I am sacrificing some value, but I also view that as a professional skill that I'm cultivating, because I'm really working on like just viewing, it's all just volume, not viewing it differently. It's like, obviously there's exceptions, there's major events and timing things and factoring that in. And at the same time, like, I didn't get into this for it to overtake my life. Actually, that just to circle back for a second, being involved in an all-encompassing organization like I was, nothing is appealing enough to like throw life so far out of balance like I did for many many years for any aim, even if it's my own money. So that's just me. Like some people have more
I'm just
zeal.
sitting here like I'm like, am I in my own made gambling cult? Like,
No,
am I?
no, no, no,
I'm
no.
like,
An
my life
essential
is not
ingredient
balanced right now. I'm
an
like,
essential
shit.
ingredient there would be, the mass and intentional exploitation of others. And
Okay,
I,
okay.
I wouldn't I wouldn't be here with you if I thought that that was anything that you had going on. But no, I mean, it's just more akin to like, not with you, but just anyone. The risk here is like working too much, and that throwing whatever out of balance. I remember the first few months after I switched to like truly risked betting. At one point I was like, this is why the stock market closes, because these
Yep.
people would lose their mind if it didn't close. Like they're like, we have enough power, like we need to shut it down so we can also live life. And so, it's on us to basically impose those boundaries, because the apps don't close, and that's one of many sort of life skills that I think a full-time person has to cultivate.
I think that's my worst skill. So something I only recently have started to actually think of as a skill. I'm always like, oh, there needs to be, yeah, you need balance. But it's like, okay, what are this? Like each skill is made up of like steps, right?
Yeah.
Like that's an ambiguous skill, but it's like broken down into little things. What does that mean? It means saying, it means the skill of, ignoring your phone, the skill of, being present in the moment with other people or whatever,
Exactly. I mean, I
whatever it
think I
is,
think
like
that's a
it
I
makes.
think it's a big one, and I think that I'm not a neuroscientist by any means, but just reflecting as I've gone through this process myself, there's like something to be said for, especially at a certain point, maybe earlier on, like a good win might be the single most chemically potent high that someone is tasting in their life on a regular basis, and like, is that inadvertently dulling a little bit of the pleasure that might have usually come from other places? And so I think it's important to at least ask these questions, because it's easy to be like, oh, I'm less social these days, when maybe the reality is like, oh, I derive less pleasure from people than I used to right
Mm,
now, because of how my life is structured. And so like, I grapple with these things,
damn.
and I think that it's good to talk about them, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, yeah, psychology,
No, I'm like, you're spot on. Like, I think that has actually changed the way I think in 5 seconds. But let's do more of that. Like, you have this social psychology background and you get into a field in gambling that is ruled by psychology, whether it's exploiting psychology, whether
Right.
it's taming your personal psychology, whatever it is, the psychology is the game.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
talk about how that's kind of how you've viewed gambling coming from that background.
Yeah, I think that, I touched on just sort of feeling like a scientific method approach to betting is one that not only is using models and analytics, but also like at a less concrete level is making as few assumptions as possible. Like Occam's razor is like the simplest explanation that fully accounts for the variables present, and so I think just having that sort of orientation is definitely beneficial. My specific background, personally and professionally, involves really delving into manipulation, which employs all sorts of factors. There can be finances, etc., but like its main agent is rhetoric, is communication in writing or speaking. That's how someone gains outsized influence on another. And so, especially starting in promo hustling, the wording and the specific the terms of service on these promos are one of the ways that they're so profitable to the book. Obviously, their main thing is like get you in the door with these bonuses. I can't imagine how many people end up not even getting the bonus because the fine print is so elaborate that like if you're not oriented to like really scrutinizing, and then sometimes like last week this happened, there was a big bonus. I saw there was two different wordings depending on which was loaded into your app, and it,
Interesting.
it was an ESPN bonus. There's nothing
Okay.
to hide. It was like a VIP bonus. Some people it said parlay, some people it didn't say parlay for the wager. And then I placed it. Mine didn't say parlay. I placed it as a straight bet, but the promo didn't disappear. Which, if you're familiar with certain ESPN promos, you opt in, you place it, and the promo card disappears. Always take a screenshot, of course. Pro tip.
Always, no matter what it is, always take screenshots. It's never bad to have screenshots.
Right. And so mine didn't disappear. And so that was like, ooh, that's alarming. That combined with it being a parlay. And, I had calculated the expected value of it. It was actually, to maximize it, was a little bit outside of my preferred risk. So I had partnered with a friend to share risk on it. Ultimately, I decided to just cash it out because if it wasn't honored, the $25 EV wasn't worth the hassle of ESPN's tech support, but also on a fresh VIP account, it just wasn't even worth the interaction at all, as far as I'm concerned. And so, I guess the broader point, just like having a really discerning eye about the intentional manipulation done by the books, which then of course extends to stuff that is not intuitive or rhetoric based, like same game parlay odds in a lot of instances, where like there's an extreme manipulation also going on there, in how they pre-make them and steer you to them. Or like Caesars now tries to add a parlay into your bet slip, and it's like, just click it here, it's like right under your actual bet. And it's like, chill, like,
Yeah, I didn't even know that. I don't know. I have to
I've
check with
seen
some of
it
my
and then it
people
went
to see if
away and then
they're
it
getting
came
that.
back. So it's on mobile. I don't know, but
If you're getting it, that probably means that that's a good account because they think you're a degen.
yeah, I mean, occasionally on fresh accounts, I'll take the prefab parlays
Yeah,
and throw a
yeah,
little
yeah.
something
Okay.
on. Take the like 8-leg local favorite parlay that they made for me, and
Yep. Gosh, so nice of them. So
right.
nice of them to click the buttons.
But I
No,
think,
I mean, no, I was
well,
gonna ask, like, what do you think about the ethics, I guess, or like the psychology employed by the sports books? I mean, these are publicly, I always found it funny because I read these like earnings reports and all this stuff in the sports books because, occasionally something slips in. It's interesting. And they have to like say these things. They're like, we increased user engagement. It's like the Dylan, my friend
mhm,
Dylan, who was on the podcast, he said like these executives are talking about it like they're selling sneakers, we're increasing lifetime value. Well, what's lifetime value? It's literally like Uncle Jimmy is now his lifetime value is lower.
right.
It's like kind of crazy to listen to all this. And like I almost find like it more refreshing to be like, hey, we want to take your fucking money. Like, but we'll play a fair game or something. You know what I'm saying? Like, how do you
There's
view
something
this
refreshing
advertisement?
about transparency. I agree. Like
Yeah.
even if we're adversaries, it's still cleaner if that's acknowledged, you know. I don't know. I mean, the ethics is a thorny situation when or it's just complex when you've chosen to make your living here as well, you know. And I listen sometimes to more like industry related podcasts, you know, like betting startups podcast. They have people who are like
I don't even know that one.
building companies in the space and so on. And obviously they tend to err on the like, this is not an unethical business I'm running side. And I see some of the points they make, you know, like I believe in the autonomy of adults to like choose things, etc. So I think it's largely above my pay grade because we have these conversations where it's like, well, they could treat winning bettors better, but then all the obscure markets go away. Like I don't know how much of that is true and not, and to like what the product and business model can actually handle in terms of different structure or less manipulation or, you know, less juice on a same game parlay, whatever form it might take. I don't know like what the real outer limits of those things are, and it would seem like a pretty tall task to get an accurate perception of that, considering how vested every player is in their own interest
Right,
in
right,
that
right.
equation. You know, it's like we're not going to get an accurate depiction of how thin of a profit margin FanDuel could subsist on. It's just like doesn't even compute as a question, you know, to them. It's like I don't know. I guess I'm disqualifying myself to a large extent from having much of an opinion there. It would seem to me like, I mean, there are certain things that just seem like quite egregious sometimes, just like really misleading, or like what I just described with the ESPN thing, like errors that end up being potentially kind of costly to a consumer and really difficult to rectify.
Yep.
And, you know, think about a square rec better who's been wronged seeking, like, you know, for us it's sort of like we expect, it's like it's a bonus if somehow we get something honored that like, but for the person who's like truly this isn't a guaranteed net winning endeavor for them and they're looking to have fun and their $1,500 risk-free bet like screwed them because of some technicality and they're just met with the same customer service that we get met with, like there's got to be better than that. Like as an industry, the fact that there's like seemingly there's no notion of customer service, and I mean I think like this is pretty ubiquitous. I recently had like a terrible experience with Robinhood, you know, and it's like you can't get to anyone with any discernment or
Brain.
decision making power, and that only feels all the stronger. Like, you know, FanDuel's the biggest show in America, and like good luck getting any sort of like personalized interaction over any issue with them, you know?
Totally. It's the worst customer service I think of any industry in the entire world. Like
Yeah. And so like
the
that certainly
people,
frustrates me.
it's whoever's fault it is. Like I guess it's the company's fault for not hiring like people who understand what's going on. But like they can't afford it. Maybe I have no, yeah, like you said, you have no clue. But like the bottom line is the customer support's terrible. And anytime you talk to anybody, talk about off the table skills, or like I call them off the table because I come from poker, but like non modeling, whatever
Yeah.
skills that win. It's like knowing how to get through customer service is a AP move for sure. There's thousands of dollars won and lost in the customer service chats.
Seriously, I mean, some of them big. You know, I know edges that necessarily relied on like a manual crediting, and
Mm-hmm.
like just in a forum I've been on, I could confidently say I've seen, you know, $50,000 taken from this one manually credited promo. You know, like
Yep.
it's wild.
Oh, it's serious. It's an edge.
Yeah. Some other places where I feel like a bit of my background or just kind of my orientation to thinking have been relevant is, you know, there's sorting through the apps, and then there's also lots of different people making content, posting pics, building tools. Like there's a lot going on for someone who's coming in and trying to like learn skills of profitable betting. And so being able to sort of assess what makes someone a legitimate authority or what makes someone kind of suspect. And there's like the rhetorical component of that, even the branding, branding, all those things like signal one way or another that. And then because we're betting, there's also like a mathematical validation of like if someone wins or not. Now we're not going to be privy to all that. Like you have a lot of people who benefit from your knowledge who are not analyzing your bets, but there's like, this whole combination of other factors that make me feel like I'm willing to gamble that GP knows what he's talking about and has been a successful bettor because he's producing all this content that's on the money, and this is his only source of income, and he seems to still have a roof over his head, and like, all those things. And so like together it's enough to move forward on, but being critical about that. And I think one of the places, an example where I think it's easy for that to lack, and I've done it too. I don't spend a ton of time on Twitter, but like these various lotto slips go around. There are absolutely edges in some very long odds, especially with SGPs and specials. Like I've had some great hits at odds that I feel like a more traditional bettor would like look at me and be like, you're not even serious. Like, so that definitely exists. But if someone is posting hits on those kind of, quote unquote lotto slips, what does the sample size actually need to be for you to be sure that this is a consistent edge? Because if the odds are, I don't know, like plus 30,000 or something like that, you're going to need a huge sample. It might be more than a season sample. So you might see someone who's like hit this giant ticket like 3 times in a season, but mathematically, like you have no clue if that's running hot or not, And so I see people end up spending so much time chasing those plays, and I can get sucked into it too, because that payday just like looks so beautiful, and so attractive when you see all those numbers in green on the screenshot. One thing that I try to do regularly to balance out my perception is like calculate the actual expected return of this bet. Because in some of the discords I'm in, like you'll get the nuke emoji beneath anything that's like 30%, let's say. But if the unit size is actually like a quarter of a unit, 30% of a quarter of a unit, like this is how much dollars we're talking. And so is that actually the best use of my time? And I think that one of the difficulties, I'll maybe touch on this a little more towards the end, is like because some of us, like myself, get some of our plays in these social environments, it's harder to fight FOMO when I'm seeing those winning slips potentially
That
from
makes sense.
like potentially from a thread of plays that I sometimes also am playing. And so,
Mm-hmm.
oh, damn, like what if I had just played it that day? And so it becomes, I've seen it like an NBA season, like this vicious cycle of like, I got to put in all these long shot combos every single day. And again, because we're in these environments with a lot of people, there's always at least one example of someone who is crushing it in whatever market you're in. And so that Pickett screenshot can really like skew your perception of the market and be like, oh, I can't leave this market because like, look, this guy's killing it. And so like that's partly a byproduct of the fact that we're now potentially in touch with hundreds of peers, and we're able to see the results of hundreds of peers. And this still might be just like variance across people, but now we're grappling with it as if it's like more important than it needs to be, And so I spend a lot of time thinking about the social temptations and growing beyond them.
I want to kind of hear a bit more about your, once you started actually betting, kind of the strategies that you're using, because I think you do some stuff that is applicable. I had someone today, talking about, oh, I want to, start betting. I'm like, they're like, I got CLV like a couple times. I'm like, don't worry about it. Like, why aren't you promo? Like, this is someone who just started. It's like, be betting promos, deposit bonuses. Like, don't forget the phrase CLV right now. I'm like, just forget it. But yeah, I want to talk about like, how it all started. Did you hit like a big, one big play to kind of skyrocket your bankroll and allow you to capture more bonuses, or like what was the first couple of months like?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point about needing sufficient bankroll to maximize bonuses, so I had a decent bankroll coming in, but this was zero risk. Like, the amount of risk I took in the first 7 months of my wagering was next to none. And I just didn't know better, nor at the time did I have objectives that made that bad. You know what I mean? And so I think that one of the things I did when needed was partnered with a friend. In this sense, it means like got more money to maximize the largest offer available to me, and we wrote up a contract and split a portion of the proceeds, and I've done that a number of times now. But the real transition to like actual betting, I was betting months and months with like, my friend would be like, okay, we're going to bet on this team. And I'm like, what sport or league is that team? And it's like
Mm.
not an obscure one, like it was pretty.
NFL, New England Patriots.
He's like, I'm not quite that bad, but close to it.
Yeah.
And so there were two things that really made the change. I mean, one, I was on a forum where I saw people starting to talk about casino promos, and it seemed like
Mm.
they were pretty lucrative. And I just dug into it. Like I figured out, like I'm not mathematically savvy, unfortunately, at all. I'm good with logic, which is like math adjacent, but I'm not mathematically savvy. But I was able, calculating the EV of these promos is actually very simple. You just need a few essential numbers, such as the promo amount, the playthrough requirements, and the RTP of whatever game, the return to player percentage of whatever game you're going to be converting the promo in. And so I started doing some calculations and was like, oh, this seems like pretty viable, like pretty fun. And I live about roughly an hour from 3 different online casino states, even though mine is not. And after I had like gone far enough, I had my spreadsheet, I sort of had calculated some EV. I was like so excited. I was like, screw it, I'm going. Like, so like
Yeah.
I just like drove, like got a hotel in New Jersey, drove to New Jersey, and did like my first round of signups, like screwed a couple up, didn't play them optimally, spent the night, woke up in the morning, drove across the border to Pennsylvania, hit a few more, ultimately profited, but like not as much as I could have, and was a little bummed about it and stuff. But I came back and regrouped and did like my next round of preparing for that kind of thing and calculating, and and had more success. I could take a day trip. And then I brought my friend into it. So the friend who had brought me into betting risk free, I was like, hey, I think we should start doing this like hustle. And so we teamed up and made some good money together in a pretty short period of time. And I think that was fun. So what that did for me, more than like a bankroll building, as they might say, was like that was my first foray into risk and variance. And I understood it well too. Like especially like converting via slots is like all you're doing is pulling a lever, so like it's not so hard to sort of understand the forms variance takes, is like basic stuff like YouTube videos. Like I know this is true, but I still need someone to tell me back
Mm.
that like the previous spin has zero relationship to the current spin, like stuff like that, and like really like letting that seep in, experiencing it. There was one time we were running through one of these promos at a higher spin number than we had done before, higher variance, quicker playthrough, better hypothetical hourly, and
Mhm.
overall earning. It was, I don't know, maybe like a $2,500 bonus, and we're like down to like $400, and we're doing relatively large spins, and I'm like, I can't take it. Like, oh. And so like I
Yeah.
called my friend and was like, this is where I'm at. And he's like, no, we're good. Like we discussed all this. We decided what level of spin and variance we're ready for. And like as we were talking, I hit a single spin for like $2,800, like already above 100% conversion. That ended up being like the most lucrative promo of that trip. And so it was like a really good, extremely low risk foray into risk and variance, because the promos gave me so much cushion. And then there was like a promo where the ideal conversion was blackjack, so I like learned a little bit of perfect
Mm.
strategy, and
Yeah.
and did that for just a few days, and I've already like forgot that from my mind.
Quick,
But
when do you split nines?
all I know is you don't split tens. uh,
Fair enough.
like, yeah, so I mean, I still find it comical. Like I tell people in my life, like what I've been doing. They're like, you're like the last person I would have thought that would end up in this hustle. But so I think the casino promos was like big conceptually, categorically. It's like now I actually gambled. But then the biggest thing that really made risk sports betting viable was a glitch. I'm debating, does it matter to say the book? I don't think at this point. There was a like very specific little glitch with Fanatics at some point last year, and select people got a decent little chunk of fan cash that was unexpected overnight. And so I logged in and I whoa, that's like good fan cash. And at this point, I'm still hedging my most of my action and converting risk free. And so, fan cash is a bonus bet with hedging, depending on the season, like 70% conversion, maybe. The problem was in this instance, there was this risk of clawback. So if I were
Hmm.
to hedge my own bets, win on Fanatics side, and then they claw those winning back, that's my own money that they're taking back because I hedged it on the other side. And so it felt too risky to hedge these. And so instead I was like, all right, I guess I'm just going to launch them. I had never done much betting. So, they allow you to break them up into any size you want. And so I broke it into equal units, like 30 some units, large relative to my bankroll. And I started just like throwing them on. I did like some of the parlay 3 -110 lines. That gets you like 76 something like that percent bonus conversion. I did like anything between plus 300 to plus 700. It was like a Friday, and I was like, I want to convert all this over the weekend and withdraw and like see what happens. Like that was my mentality. And so I threw all those bets on stuff unhedged, and in the end, like, it converted to a little bit more than, like, it pretty much hit the theoretical EV, and so then I was like, all right, I got this pot of free money, like, that like really came to me inadvertently. I've already withdrawn it. I've not faced any repercussions. In fact, several months later, they approached me for VIP on that account, which I took.
It's just so funny sometimes.
Really got lucky. I mean, especially considering like it's Fanatics. Most people's leash there is like 2 hours. So I just like, sometimes you slip through the cracks. But so I took that and I was like, all right, this is my actual gambling bankroll. And I moved into some, like top down plus EV forums and started understanding debigging a bit. And that first month, that bankroll doubled. I hit like
There we go.
one of those DraftKings stepped up parlay promos that, was like 50 some units for me at the time. The next month, I tripled the already resized, increased bankroll. And I was like, well, I guess this is what I do now.
And
And that,
there's the same story. And that's the common story that everybody has.
right. That's where I totally think people make this point, like people who stick with this, and I'm barely in this, who knows how long ultimately all this will be my main thing, but it does seem like early good or bad variance has probably shaped many lives in one direction or the other, because that great month of mine, that was the end of last year, and what, we're at the end of July now, like I've not had a month like that since, like if my first 2 months had been like my last few months, I don't know how
Yeah.
enticing it would feel right now, and so I got that early, like really great variance, and now I've sort of rolled from there. And I think that I recognize sports is not where my edge comes. Like sports knowledge and obviously like modeling directly is not where my edge is going to come from at this point. And so I have been sort of pasting together the skills that I have. I have friends. I help them through the promos. That becomes like a supplemental income. I've done a little bit of moving for people when I have the ability, and I forge partnerships with people I interact with who seem either on a personal level in this work or on a financial level to like have value, and we find value for each other, so like someone shared some of their model results with me, and I found out that the market was on an app that they hadn't even, that market was also on another app that they were neglecting, and sometimes it had the best lines, and so like boom,
Hmm.
I'm like, I with very little expertise, I just put some value back into this endeavor,
That's
and
right.
and so that's kind of how I've made my go. And I won't, it's not been always, sometimes it's been a slog for sure, but I also reflect on the trade-offs in other roles and jobs I've had. And like one thing that just stands out is I do not miss Zoom me, like the sort of artifice of like the small talk and the way you have to like engage with each other. In the nonprofit world, you have like a volunteer board at the top who often like hold a ton of power, but you also have to like treat them with kid gloves, and just like being unburdened from that is worth pushing through mediocre variants to see if this
Mhm.
is going to be like a thing I make it in. And, you know, I'm heading to BetBash in a couple weeks and looking forward to seeing what kind of connections come from that.
I think you will do well at BetBash, and I think when you first reached out to me, it kind of you kind of reminded me of another guest of the show a little bit, which was Giants Badgers, where it was like you're just willing to reach out to people, have conversations, and have like thoughtful conversations, and you know, I found that not many, I get a lot of DMs and usually they're like, how do I do my taxes? Or like, who's going to win the 3M Open? It's like, I'm like, you know, avoid. I think that it's a real skill to know what you're good at and where your edges come from. And when you were like, yeah, like my skill's not modeling, it doesn't have to be. I don't know how much modeling like Billy Walters is doing anymore.
Right.
If I'm being
Right.
honest, like I think he's on to, or Tony Bloom, I think they're on to bigger and better things, honestly. Like, so you don't have to be like this excellent modeler, but I think like what you've done well is you're very thoughtful about like what your skills are, where you can add value, what you need to improve, and just how you think about all of this. And, one thing is I was like looking for somebody to do a course on, basically kind of starting from that bonus stage, how to optimize bonuses and, how to, make how to make a sports betting account and get the most out of it. Like that's the other thing. It's like a lot of value from the account comes upon account creation, right? It's like nobody tells anybody like how to actually appropriately sign up for a sports betting account. So, I reached out to you and, you're doing a class for GP Academy, but I wanted to also have you on here. So like I'll talk a little bit about bonuses, but I'm not the person to give good advice on that. But I wanted people who are listening to this podcast to get some good advice on they're just starting out, they got a couple $1,000s, and they want to spin that up. And I think that's
Yeah.
where in that first stage, it's make or break because you could have some crazy high returns if you do this properly. And the trajectory of like, you can go from like 3,000 to 10,000 so much faster than you can go from 300,000 to a million. So it's like getting that speed up early is
Yeah.
so valuable. So I just wanted to have like I just wanted to make some time for you to give advice to people who might be in that situation.
Yeah, for sure. And I'll just caveat in advance, you know, I'm sure that I personally know people, at least, you know, virtually, who are better at any of the things I'm about to discuss, but I think I'm conversant enough to certainly speak on it. And then also just, you know, it does vary based on your bankroll, your aims, etc. Like last night we were on a live stream, and like the utility of intro VIP to someone who's
Mm-hmm.
moving big money may be less than the utility of intro VIP to someone who's starting like I am, you know? And so I just
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge that. But the value of promotions, just like anything else, degrades over time. And yet still there's thousands to be had out there, you know? And so in brief, if someone wanted to approach it, they're like brand new, I would, it can feel like a bit of work, but like it's going to totally be worth it. You know, I'd make a spreadsheet of all the books in your state, and I'd go in and I'd look at exactly what the sign up bonuses are. Sometimes there's two, like you have to pick one or the other, do the calculations of which might be more lucrative. I will say that the one tool that I found fairly essential to the promo grind would be Dark Horse Odds, which is a, you know, pretty affordable paid service. It has an odds screen like others, but its entirely primary function is bonus exploitation via hedging. And so the calculators that are there are just perfectly suited for this need. And so it
It's
feels like
so
it,
good.
yeah, it feels like it would be
Anytime
hard.
anybody asks me like how to, I just copy paste the link, Dark Horse off. copy
Right. I
paste,
think it would
whatever the
be hard for
definition
me
would
to
say.
like plug the ideal way to do these without some tool is going to be needed. And I don't know of a better one than that. Some of those features can be done on some of the other paid services. Some of them are even on some free services, but none quite as refined, I feel like, as that one. And so that allows you to enter exactly which type of promotion it is, exactly like what the terms are. So you might have like, this is a $1,000 loss back promo, and I get it as a bonus bet, not as a site credit.
Mhm.
I only get it if it loses, or I only get it if it wins. Like you can put all of those in, and the calculations have been done, and it'll tell you currently in the market where's the best to bet. What I would do with the list of books is, if let's say our example is starting with only $3,000, you leave some of the better ones until you've already built up a bit of that money. So you have a book like Bet Rivers, which pretty universally is a $500 risk-free bet. If you play that with hedging, you can expect roughly 50% of that value. So like 250 bucks risk free. And that's significant when you're building up that first little. So, you start with the apps that don't flood you with additional promotions that you're not yet able to take advantage of after the first ones. So like FanDuel has a set schedule of initial bonuses, and they're going to be offering you some decent deposit matches the first couple weeks. But if your bankroll's small, you want to hold off until you've built up the money to exploit those deposit matches. Whereas something like a Caesars, you get the intro sign up offer, and then you're just plugged into their standard daily promos. Depending on action, they might give you a 50 max bet or a $10 max bet or whatever, but you're not going to get these like capital intensive promos from there. DK is the big one, that will have that. And so you want to be ready to take advantage of those. And so you sort of build up from like the least useful to the most useful. With a $3,000 bank, it's going to be really hard to maximize. I'll be honest, if you're hedging, especially because to hedge a bet optimally means the hedge side is the shorter odds and it's much larger. So if you have $1,000 risk-free bet promo, your hedge side might be over $3,000 depending on the odds. And so you need all that money available. You're not risking it, but it will be hard to optimize until you've built up closer to 10.
Got it.
I don't think that's impossible, because say you're on Caesars, MGM also is not going to give you much after initial, so that is an early one. Fanatics, it's like $100 bonus a day. You grind through that, you make 400 bucks or something, and then they have some decent daily promos. So I think you could still build up slowly. The other key to how I do this, and how I kind of learned it, I'm only doing these bets on main lines at first. All of these bets, I'm taking slightly lesser conversion rates, and I'm only doing main lines. And there's a couple benefits. One is like a site like Fanatics or Bet Rivers is likely to limit you immediately. Like they might even limit you on a main line if you get enough CLV, but they're
Mhm.
definitely more likely to limit you if your first bets are, the best price in the market, a player prop or whatever. So by doing it a bit more conservative, I think you get some more longevity. But the other major benefit of mainline hedging is you're showing the other side so much manufactured action
Mhm.
on main lines. And
Yep.
so, I know how to get pretty reliably DraftKings VIP, whether I go the referral route or just open a fresh account, because there's a range of handle that I'll hit in the first 10 days and I'll time it right. So, like, that's me hedging the Caesars intro, the MGM intro. And like, if you do it perfect, you sort of like get VIP at one place, and then you're like churning a large bonus against another place, and maybe you get VIP there, or
Yeah.
like,
So it's like kind of like you're bouncing back. Like one's the VIP, and then it becomes the bonus churn or whatever.
yeah, yeah, exactly. You're like playing them off each other a little bit to create tens of thousands of dollars of relatively square action, because this is where someone with a larger bankroll would take exception with this method. Like, you're losing some value. You're taking one good bet and one bad bet, two mediocre bets or two bad bets on sometimes on both sides relative to to
Mhm.
like, an actual EV calculation. But the perk of that is like you're not crushing CLV. They're just seeing a bunch of these mainline bets come in not many hours before the game. I don't do anything overnight at that point, etc. Stick to fairly popular sports, and it can really work well. Then you might get the type of bonus that's like $2,000 unlocked as you wager $2,000. So then when I'm churning against a promo like that, I'm not even losing as much, like that's value being returned to this otherwise slightly negative EV hedging process,
Mhm.
because I'm actually getting
No.
some back to me. And so there's like a number of ways to sort of cut it, but I think I would also be remiss to not touch on the either there's promos that are either unhedgeable or all the value disappears if you try to hedge it. So,
Mhm.
a 50% $100 max profit boost is like a really solid promo for someone
Mhm.
where that's a relevant unit size. You go to hedge it and your profit's like $2.50.
Mhm.
And so I think for someone with a small bankroll, you need to be careful because, like, if you have a $3,000 bankroll and DK is throwing you $100 bonuses and you're maxing them, like, you're probably betting above Quarter Kelly. But you could do that judiciously with some of these promos. But wherever they aren't too large, you should definitely be hitting them. And, there's a lot of free, good Twitter pro accounts, or just in terms of like getting the promo plays. And then it becomes like you create your daily routine, you're hitting this Discord, this Twitter account, etc. You're finding the play, you plug them in, and you can just kind of grow it like that.
I mean, there's so many good tidbits there. It ranges from one thing I'm interested in is you seem to have a very good handle over the characteristics of your different accounts. So what I mean is like, okay, this is the DK that's in showcase. It's 5 days in. Is this like, how are you tracking this? How are you staying on top of all of this?
Well, I'm not doing a ton at a time at this point, for
Mm,
one, and my most significant losses have been in the form of an error, or like $1,500 in promo bets expired because I it slipped my mind. So I'm not perfect, but if I have enough going on at a time, I'll create a little spreadsheet to kind of track the different accounts. I think that it starts to become the same process. And like something like the DraftKings showcase is standard across accounts. It's like your first week will start on a Thursday and you'll get 3 weeks of bonuses unless they like forget to credit it, which happens a lot too. And that like they actually added recently like a confirmation. So like if you get through showcase and you get VIP, they like threw a little confirmation card in the account that's like, you've made it. A rep will be reaching out to you. Um,
that's nice.
so yeah, it makes it a bit easier to track, but each day I'm logging in, taking stock of what's available, or if I'm working with a friend, I'll have them send me the screenshots of what promos they have. Yeah, and then
Makes
it
sense.
changes too. I think that you can benefit from the wisdom of crowds. If you're I'm definitely in some discords where people move through more accounts than me and have a larger sample size of these experiences. And I don't hesitate to go and ask like what the recent experience is, what kind of offers are people getting. A lot of people are pretty generous with information.
I mean, it seems like networking is a big part of the initial promo grind because, like, ultimately, you'll never be able to know, like, to catch every promo that gets put up, right?
Plus, the biggest intros are VIP referrals where you've not even
Mm,
made the account yet and you're getting a special registration code for when you make the account. Those are like the single most lucrative. Like last night someone was saying that might put more eyes on your account. So if you're someone who's like trying to push through large amounts quick, that may not be ideal. But I think for a lot of people up to a certain level, if you then play it safe afterwards, coming in at
hmm
the intro VIP status and keeping those VIP promos for a while is quite lucrative. And it gives you so much wiggle room. So like now I just don't play some of these promos optimally because they're still great EV, but I can keep it on a square looking line and like sacrifice a couple bucks, but I think that's worth it. Like, yeah, I mean,
No, I I was now that what popped in my mind is exactly that. It's like, how is even being like a really sharp bettor a good skill for somebody who's trying to max promos? Because how much of it is restraint and like just slapping your hand every time you want to go pick off like an obvious like bad line?
A lot of it is restraint. And in fact, me and a friend, the friend who got me into this, like for on Dark Horse odds, you can filter out. So like we basically make it so we're not even seeing the bets that we know are going to be better, but we don't want to be tempted by. And so it's
Mhm.
like ignorance is bliss. So I've already pre-filtered it to cut out some of the highest value in
Yep.
favor of longevity.
Yep.
Yeah, I definitely think that there's a place for that.
I think that's smart. I've always like this is something that Ed Miller talked about. And like I may have asked him about, but it's like the one of the best tools in sports betting would just be like this stream of like -1% to +1% EV bets that are like close to post, you know. Like
Yeah.
with that, you can do a lot. You can sneak a lot of sharp action in under that, you know.
Yeah, like
Uh,
sometimes a line will move right before I get it on like a
yeah.
hedge, and I'm like, oh, all right, well, I'm taking $5 less, but I'm certainly not looking sharp to this book,
Right, right,
hitting this
right,
line seconds after it
right.
got worse, you know, like
Right.
um,
Except line, odd change. Yes.
right,
You know,
unless I guess
if it wins, it
it's
wins, you know?
right, unless it steams a lot further, then I guess it could still end up looking sharp. But yeah, and then so much of this stuff is conjecture. Like we're all it's
Mhm.
so funny to me for like betters who like, will be like, "Well, what's your sample size on these results?" When it comes to like account tactics, we're all just like throwing anecdotes back and forth at
Mhm.
each other and, and like making decisions based on them. But it's also like the best most of us can do unless we get special knowledge like behind the curtain.
Yeah, I think, like, A/B testing is actually really useful in this. It's really the only way to, like, kind of check up on what factors are your counterparties taking into account when judging an account.
Right.
Yeah, taking into yeah, exactly.
No,
You know
no,
what I mean?
totally. No, like just hearing. I recently actually looked at one of the main like customer relationship manager softwares that's used for the book.
Okay.
I was like, oh, I
That's
wonder
very
if there'll
sharp,
be like
very smart.
I was like, I wonder if there'll be any interesting stuff on their site. And I think if I dug further or if I was at a larger scale, there might be like more actionable information, perhaps. But I did like hearing Matthew Trenhale on one of his two recent
Mhm.
appearances. He seemed to say, if I remember correctly, that like it's been years where these books have tags like OddsJam user, unabated user,
Mhm.
etc. Because like the clustering of behavior is like
So
so
obvious.
obvious, and that whole point is obvious, and nonetheless, like hearing it concretely stated from someone who's seen that screen is like, okay, well, that's really real. And now, like maybe I'm taking a play from a group environment and I'm taking an extra 30 seconds to change up a leg or
Mhm.
take the most obscure leg and make it something that's closer to a main line or whatever it may be. Just like less people having the exact same slip as me, more better. And so we're always evolving these tactics, but
I agree. And that's why I'm like, I don't really think that those services could scale as is. Because there's no scale there, right? It's like
I mean,
the
I've experienced. Yeah, go on.
each additional user you bring onto a platform like OddsJam or Unabated makes the service worse for the current users.
Yeah, I mean, I think unabated has some stuff that is less
Yes. The
tied up in a
simulations. Yeah, yeah,
bow,
yeah.
and so like
Sure.
someone they can even upload their own projections and whatnot. So I think those tools are more scalable. But a lot of the places I've never had OddsJam. I got it, and the spam was like on principle. I was like, I want nothing to do with
Bro.
this.
I used to be like you. This is the OddsJam email. I used to be like you. Now I make it's like, all right,
so,
sorry, Sam or whatever,
so
OddsJam Sam or whoever was emailing you.
so I've never used that specifically, but I've definitely in my short time watched other sort of quick tools that I've used that might, spit out the entire play or almost the entire play or whatever it may be, become like unusable for me. Because like to a point I heard you make a long time ago, like if your edge is notifications, your skill is like speed. And I'm in my mid 30s and these 20-year-olds got me beat. Like
They're fast. They're
I don't know what
fast,
to
dude.
say. Like
We're
they
over there cooking our dinner. They've already hit everything on the screen.
I'm like getting used to using a second screen still, and like, I'm like, oh, my windows are always on top of my other windows, and I'm toggling back and forth, and they're just like, I struggled as the number of users has grown, the number of people hitting the plays has grown. I just find myself being like aged out almost. And it ebbs and flows. Like if I'm really prepped, I have no other distractions, I can still get in there and hit some pings. But they have diminishing value anyway, because my FanDuel account's at 10%, or what, the ramifications of those kind of plays. So
Yeah.
it's definitely, that's also one of the things that's like propelled me to try to look for other ways to find edges, because it's also like drives me mad. Like there's nothing worse than like chasing 6 pings in a row and just missing each one. Or like the worst experience, there's one market some people might know that like overcorrects. So like a ping comes, people hit it, the other side becomes good, and so like you've
Mhm.
got the first side in your slip, you try to place it, it dies, you go back out, you put the other side in your slip, you glance at the fair value to try to size it, and then it
Right.
dies, and
Yeah.
I'm just like pulling my hair out.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think that the automation services, it'll be interesting to see what happens this year, like once more sports are back up, and like how much stuff is hindered by it or not. It's not a sustainable way of living for me as my only edge, that's for sure.
Ultimately, like that's the only thing you can kind of do to make yourself flexible enough. So when people made a lot of money on OddsJam, it's like it wasn't
Right.
bad to use OddsJam at the time if like you understood what it was good for. People made a lot of money live arbing for a couple months. Good. They should
Right.
do that.
Right. Yeah.
Right? It's like go make money. It's easier to make more
Even the
money if you have
casinos,
money.
like the casino promos decreased even in the time that I was doing them. They're still worth it, but like for me, because I've already exhausted all of my own accounts for those, the combination of like finding someone who's interested in it, setting them up fully, traveling interstate, spending a few days churning, and then chopping that up, it's not enough to entice me right now. But like there's still value there for sure, and depending on your situation, like it can absolutely be worth it. Maybe you have a close-knit family of 6 and all of you can take a trip and
Yeah.
clear over
A couple
50K.
bonuses. Yep.
Like that's totally possible, like absolutely, number wise. So yeah, the what's ideal changes for sure.
Right. And that's like been my experience since, I'm here like betting originated in golf and I started like playing online 25 cent, 50 cent Raz. It's like been a long journey in the gambling space that's taken me through a lot of different things. And I think the only like the stuff that stuck with me is every time I talked to somebody who was like, more seasoned in the space, they would give me they would give me a lot of advice that kind of applied to my next thing too.
Mm,
It wasn't like this is just, of course, technical stuff on how to do stuff is important. But then like I think I collected along the way a lot of stuff that like ultimately built. So like when I started my next endeavor, when the edges shifted around and the money was somewhere else, like I could get into that much faster. And it made the existential problem of like, what if my edge dies? Like I won't be able to make a living. It made
right.
that a little calmer for me, which was like a huge part because I was like, it's almost like it will die.
Right.
That's okay. I've done this before. I have all of these heuristics, as you would say, that will make the next iteration a lot easier.
Totally. And I mean, I think that's one of the great things you've done. As I was getting into risk, like your podcast was up and running. Again, I'm a fresh fish, relatively speaking. And so I really feel like you encapsulate like principles, like the really like the heuristic, like what is guiding principle of this subject, like even the notion of putting ROI in perspective, and like talking about like hourly, like it's obvious and overlooked in a lot of the environments that I'm in. And so I appreciate that. I feel like you've definitely done some of that for me, which is like there's some like aphorisms. I think I told you one that I think I heard from you was like, if you're doing this, you're going to experience a worse and longer downturn than you thought possible. And
Yep.
that saved me so much grief. Now, like I view my worst stretch as like a milestone. Like this was an inevitability.
Yep.
I gotta experience it, and like until the next worst one it
Yeah.
comes. You know. So yeah, I appreciate what you've contributed.
No, I mean, I always tell people like it's part of what we get paid to do. It's like that downswing. It's just part of our job description. Like it doesn't happen to people who are recreational because your worst downswings inevitably like running the bottom bucket of like 100 long-term sims or semi-long-term sims. The recreational bettor doesn't have like 100 semi-long-term samples of bets,
Right.
but the professional does. So you'll feel that bottom bucket once or twice in your career, and it's so much worse than you could ever imagine. So, but it's okay. And pause. I like always say this, like, and that's okay. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's like part of the gig, but it sucks, no doubt.
And
And
early good variance helps a lot too with buffering.
yeah, that's
So
the
like
other thing. Like, yeah.
so the day I lost, like I don't remember what it was, like how many units it was at the time, but like it's like rolled off my back because I was crushing it that month. But
Hmm.
if there hadn't been the initial part, it would have been a lot harder, I think.
Yeah. No, I remember my worst like, my worst one in poker was worse than my sports betting one. It just felt like I was like, "It's so bad." It's like, "Well, okay, like, today" it's like, "Okay, it's so bad, so, like, it'll turn around, and then it just gets worse." And then you're like, "Okay, it's, like, been really, really bad." And, like, my expected value, like, chip EV is pretty good, so, like, probably turns around. And it's like, somehow it's, like, worse, and you're like, "This is impossible." You're like and then you're like,
Or
"Okay, so
you
this is
get
what
like
it really feels
the
like." Oh, yeah.
initial upturn, and you're like, oh, it's
And then it's
over,
just like,
it's over,
boom.
thank God. It's like, no, that
And then
was
it's like
that
from
was
the
just a
top rope.
speed bump.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And honestly, like, community is really good for that. I don't know if at the time, I've always had at least a small group of good friends. Shout out to my early poker crew, Ben Reasons, Nikolai Morris and whatnot. But without having that close circle, you just would drive yourself crazy by imagining like it's going to go on forever and whatever. But having someone like Ben at the time, who was a professional poker player longer than I was, when he was like, "Yeah, let me show you my graph," and then like he found a section of his graph that looked like what I was going through, and then he checked out some hands. He's like, "Looks fine.
Mhm.
Here's a section of my graph that was exactly that." And then I'm like, still sucks, but like I'm like, okay, that's okay. I'll keep going then. And like I don't know if I would have done that without Ben or without kind of that crew.
That's a great point. And when you sent me a couple questions in advance, one was about like actionable tips, and the one that I wanted to bring was like get over the partnership hump.
Mm-hmm.
If you're anywhere near, like think about what you're doing, and if there's a spot where partnering could benefit, and like figure out what you would need to be comfortable with that, and like start trying it. Because I say that because I started under the tutelage of someone who has become my partner on any number of plays. We talk on the phone more days than not in a week, and like we built a very close, profitable, like healthy friendship through that. And when the going's tough, we have a sympathetic ear, and like no one else in my pre-gambling life understands any of this, so like they can't sympathize with variance and things like that on any like meaningful, satisfying level. And so I think what you were just speaking about is like the value of community broadly, maybe a partner who's like
Mm-hmm.
learning these things with you. Like I crack the casino code, and then he figures out some other thing, and they move back and forth. But then there's also a lot of practical ways that can help. Like I said, maximizing offers by sharing money. Now that I hedge a lot less and I am taking risk, there's sometimes offers that to maximize is more risk than I can take, but I have a few friends who are happy to take a chunk of it for me. So like I'm still able to show the book that I'm just like dumping money on this line,
Mm-hmm.
but I've not gone outside what is reasonable risk for me. Or maybe maybe you have a few rec accounts, especially if you're just getting started, like sitting dormant, and you might be able to move a little money for someone. It's worth weighing the account health implications and all of that, but
Mhm.
like think outside the box, and that's definitely, yeah, I realize like networking, having good discussions, connecting with people on like a human level is one of my skills. And so how do I turn that into a financial edge as well? And so like that's how I'm trying to like, yeah, partnership is maybe the crux of my approach right now.
I think it's smart. It's like finding an uncommon edge. You're always trying to go against the crowd. And I do think like having been in the space forever, I've met more people who are many more people who are introverted than extroverted in the space who won. A lot of the people who lose in the space are extremely extroverted. But like of the people who are successful and do this for money, most tend to skew introverted. So whether it's, fighting your way out of introverted tendencies, which I think would be more me, or just being, leaning into that extrovert quality, which, that's my read on you and someone like Aaron, like Giants Badgers, that creates real edge because not many people possess that naturally, at least in the space. So
Yeah, I think I'm relatively introverted, but I think I've fully embraced cold calls as
mhm.
something that have served me well in life, kind of,
Mhm.
and I'm confident in like my ability to speak and write, and that helps a lot in like broaching something unfamiliar.
I think that's a good I think that's a good bow on it. I'm, I've always found that the way that you look at, like you literally just said, like being able to speak and write helps. Imagine telling like certain people that like there's anything from speaking and writing that can make you more money in betting outside of, getting their R squared optimal and like, adding another variable to the model. They'd be like that. No, no. But like it's true. Sorry, like that's the game. Sometimes it's like I apologize that the game isn't purely a mathematical modeling game, but that's the reality. So you can embrace it or you can not make as much money as you should be. And what I've enjoyed about you is you fully embrace what the game really is, I think, in all of the different intricate aspects of it. And that's come out like in our conversation. And I feel like that's come out really well in this podcast. And that's just like a huge no brainer for me to A, bring you on, but B, make a course where you're so good at communicating and thinking differently that it's like actually going to move the needle outside of like, oh, this is like a plus EV bonus bet, so I bet it. It's like, no, like I want to know what Joseph is thinking and like where that applies to everything else and where I can, make some extra money at the non-obvious spots. And, so I've always appreciated that about you. So yeah, I'm really thankful that you came on and were willing to discuss with us. Like, I think anybody who listened to this became a better. That's the goal.
I mean, I appreciate that praise for sure. I think that it ties a little bit back to the beginning, which is like my approach of viewing this as a whole thing, not just the act of betting, comes from entering into it from an advantage angle to begin
Hmm.
with, and also like so deeply abandoning a worldview. You
Hmm.
realize like, oh, there's like over 8 billion people in the world. Like, whatever I think is like normative or like how everyone should live, like, it's just small minded of me. Like, there's just so many
Hmm.
ways that life occurs. And so there's also a lot of ways that like successful betting probably occurs, And so I certainly carry that over. And I guess the last thing I'll touch on, not to reopen everything though, is just that like encouraging people to reflect about all those things, like
Hmm.
reflect about a great way to sort of like assess if I've been sort of snowballed into something that is more than I bargained for is like, think back to the aims and ideals that brought you in the first place, and like they can evolve, but also they can get overshadowed. So like, say I got into this because I wanted extra money every month to take my girlfriend out for like a really nice something or other. Next thing you know, it's like can't pull any money out, barely, like not even seeing her as often, like whatever it may be. So like check in with your goals, especially because we're in these
Mhm.
environments where we're interacting with people that have other goals, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like I've listened to, Giants Badger, like that episode, one of the most salient takeaways for me was like, that's not the grind for me. This guy
Mhm.
is plugged in more,
Mhm.
and I'm older than him. Like he has more energy, I'm sure. But like that guy is plugged in a way that is not what I aspire to. And like the returns, he's making way more money than me, I'm sure, but they're not even worth it to me personally. And like that's just down to personal objectives, differences, stages of life. But like it's easy to lose sight of that if you don't like make those times to check in. And like it's great if you have a friend who you can have those honest conversations with, where like the times where you're like, that behavior is a little bit like on the spectrum of working hard to addict. It's like falling
Yeah, yeah.
further on the spectrum than I want or whatever. And those are like can be embarrassing or like hard conversations to have. So if you create a place where people are open about that, it can only be positive, I think.
I agree. And like it's I was literally at a wedding where I saw one of like my best friends from college, and he was something like, how many days a week do you take off? And I was like, it's definitely 0, or it's definitely between 6, it's definitely between 0.5 and 0. And he was like, I don't like, are you okay? And I was like, no one's asked me that, but like maybe I should be trying to take maybe one day off, or like at least hit that 0.5. And that was very recently. And like it's not a conversation at all that's really had in the space. And like that's probably why I hadn't even thought about it. But I was like, oh damn, yeah, like, that's not normal, right? Like
And that's
this
what
is
I
my
want to push back a little bit, I think, is like I said before, I was in a situation that literally took infinity energy from me. There was
hmm
no time at which the religious mission, was going to conclude. It was just like
hmm
anything you have, we'll take it forever and always. And so I realized like it's on you to figure out the parameters in your life and like draw them and try to maintain them. And so I just very clearly after that experience knew that like nothing is worth a certain degree of wrapped upness. And that's partly why I had to step back from nonprofits, because they tug on your not like tug on your heart is underselling it. It's like they're working towards something that if you're into it is very meaningful, very rewarding, like helping other people, whatever it may be. And it can just subsume you, because
hmm
there's a big cause that's overarching it. And so yeah, I hope everyone gambles profitably, unplugs when they feel like unplugging, and I like some acknowledgement that we're not always the best influences on each other. Like we can be
That's
honest
true.
about that in these spaces,
That's a good point.
like and it doesn't have to, like, bad habits don't have to mean you fail. Like we all have them, and like I said before, they are the most natural temptation in this work, is to succumb to recency bias, succumb to
hmm
FOMO. Like that's like we're battling human nature in trying to think in averages across randomness. Like it's really a tall order.
It's hard. It's a battle. I mean, it's not natural, right?
Yeah.
It's just not natural. But yeah, I think that's a great way to end it. I think that's spot on. I don't really want to take away from that. So thanks for coming on, Joseph. And I'm really excited to have you reach Joseph, at least in the the GP Picks Discord, or GP Academy. He goes as Tip Tap, and then you've recently started Twitter. What are we looking
Yeah,
at?
I figured I've just lurked on Twitter, but I figure I'll probably start posting a bit and engaging some more. So I launched a fresh one, Living Wagerer, and so if someone wants to reach out to me there, that's fine, or Discord. And yeah, most likely I'll be a bit more visible moving forward.
Very cool. All right. Well, thank you again for coming on. Thanks everybody for listening, and I will see everybody on the next episode.